Oh, I was waiting in anticipation. All right, how's it going? Welcome to DTS Destination the Show, episode 11. JD Cameron back on the 1st of November with Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's going on, man? How are you?
It feels like winter now because it's dark outside like all the time.
Upsetting.
And so I think my mood probably ties directly to that. Um, but it's all right. How are you doing?
I'm not doing well, and here's why. I have had a shocking moment of realization in about the last 2 minutes that tonight is quite possibly the last baseball night that we are going to have until the spring. And instead of sitting upstairs on my couch enjoying it, I'm stuck here talking to
Stop.
you.
You stop talking to me.
So there's that.
Sorry.
Um, yeah, man. I hope the Diamondbacks can get back in this series and at least bring it back to Texas because I don't know about you, but I feel like winning it at home feels way cooler than winning it
It,
on the
it
road.
should always be like that.
Yeah,
But
for
you know
sure.
what? If the Twins were going to win the World Series and it happened to finish on the road, I would take that. I won't be picky.
Fair, fair, 100%. Now, let me ask you this before we get into the baseball stuff. You have kids, right?
I have
Um,
four and one, and that's not my own.
how was your Halloween? Did you
There's actually
survive?
my kids are older.
Uh,
Well, I mean, three of them don't trick or treat. One of them does. The other one was not home. So, um, for me though, I work in an elementary school, so Halloween is like this whole day event. Um, with this big parade that like 1,000 people come and watch, and
okay.
so it was fine. I think the way that my Halloween ranks is if the weather's good enough to drink cold beer, that's great. If the weather's so cold that I have to make an alcoholic hot drink, that's okay too. So we trick or treat for a little bit, then we come home, and it's a pretty easy night. But I feel like
No,
you with younger kids, that probably is a little different.
that's right, man. I got my steps in. Let's put it that way. But I developed a new trick in the book this year, right? Which is I'm going to share this for all the people that have young kids. We took some of our neighbors' kids trick or treating this year, and while that may seem like extra work, all it really does is add to the parental safety tax that I take out of everyone's Halloween candy bag at the end of the night. So, in order to get escorted through the neighborhood by me, you have to pay a tax. You have to pay a toll at the end of the night
Okay.
with your from your bag.
Candy.
And the
Yeah.
more kids that are there, the greater my tax is. So, next year, I'm just about to go door to door and knock for people's kids first before we even get rolling and stock up.
Also, if you have more kids, the kids just kind of hang out with each other, and they're not like, "Dad, dad, 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 dad." And so that just kind of works for itself too. You got to go in a group.
There you go.
That's the secret always.
Group is the way to go. Producer Theo behind the scenes already actually working hard, unlike us, tells us that we've only had two teams win the World Series at home in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
2013 Red Sox and the Astros last year. That seems unbelievable. I mean, I believe you, but that's crazy. Jeremy, before we dig into the kind of one and only big topic for the day, big news for the Twins that dropped this week, and I'm curious to get your take on it. Yesterday, it was announced that Dick Bremer would not return to the booth for the Twins after 40 seasons, close to 5,000 games. Initially, that looked like potentially like a retirement, but Dan Hayes of the Athletics soon broke the news that the Twins had actually made that decision to move on. Curious what you make of this news, and I kind of feel like we're going to have different perspectives because you're a Twins lifer and I am not.
Yeah. So when it appeared to be a retirement, I was like, "Good for Dick Bremer," and that was it for me. When I saw the later news, that was irritating. If that was the path you were going to go, and you knew that was the path you were going to go, which I'm guessing they did when he was still in the booth,
Mm-hmm.
let him have a end of his career thing. It doesn't have to be huge, and Bramer wouldn't have wanted it to be huge,
Mm-hmm.
um, but give the guy some credit. 40 years, like if you want to go your separate ways, go your separate ways. And I think that's okay. But I think for Twins fans, that's the only voice that we've ever heard. And to
Mm-hmm.
just have that be now like pushed aside seems kind of unfair. Now we watched it happen with the Timberwolves last year, and I thought that I didn't love that. Michael Grady's been great.
He's
And
so awesome,
so
dude.
there can be, they can upgrade from Dick Bremer from the the play-by-play type thing, but he had so much background
Mm-hmm.
on the Twins, which made listening to Twins broadcasts as a Twins fan awesome. We don't know what's going to happen with Bally's. We don't know what's going to happen with the Twins. So I guess that adds some mystery to it. But for me, it was a disservice that the Twins did for Dick Bremer, and really just not a fair way to end things.
So then if I'm like paraphrasing you, right, your kind of beef here is actually not like the moving on piece. It's more so the way that they did it and not giving him the opportunity to essentially have a send off, a goodbye message, etc. at the end of the season
Yeah, I
if
mean, I
they
think
knew that's what they were going to do.
I think that's fair. I just don't give the guys some credit for being 40 years and being awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Even and for having so many years with Bert Blyleven, who was absolute trash.
Yeah, see, I already kind of think we're looking at Bremer through rose-colored spectacles a little bit. Like, I feel like Twins fans' collective opinion of him has significantly improved since Bert has been out of the booth and this rotating crew of folks has come in. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think he's better post Bert? Because that's definitely something I feel like from my much like more limited experience watching Twins games than you. It feels better, more refreshed, more up to date for like the modern younger baseball fan post Burt. And I do think Dick Bremer deserves a lot of credit for kind of um, managing that evolution.
Yeah, for sure. I think Blyleven held Bramer back because Blyleven was like so many announcers that we hear nationally now that hate baseball, that think that baseball should be played like it was 30 years ago.
Smoltz.
Uh, but Bramer, I thought, with analytics becoming more prevalent, really kind of leaned into that. Uh, and I think Bramer deserves some credit for how much better Morneau's gotten.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm alone in that opinion, but I think that he kind of, he helped Justin Morneau kind of get through broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had a revolving door of people. It's been Tom Kelly, it's been Roy Smalley. And no matter who that is and how good they are or what they have to talk about, he's always been able to really carry on that conversation. Talking for 3 hours every night would be really, really difficult. And doing it with different people, I think maybe sounds easier, but you have to really kind of figure out that person's strengths and then work
Mm-hmm.
towards their strengths for 3 hours a night for 162 games a year. That's tough.
Yeah, that's fair. Talking to you for 45 minutes once a week is enough for me. I can't imagine doing for for 3 hours every night. I guess like the only thing I would say is like, usual like social media reaction of like pretty divided and split and like fairly extreme opinions. Like 40 years is an incredible run, and I do think that's fair to kind of quibble with or have an issue with the way that the Twins handled that. Although I would point out that we don't know if the Twins had planned to do that in advance, and there's no way for us to know that until way down the road, maybe never. But 40 years is an amazing run, and that's pretty sweet job security. And Bremer's been in a pretty fortunate position. I'm sure he will recognize that himself. And so I definitely get the issues with the lack of send off. But I personally do not have a problem with going a new direction. And I'm hoping that direction might be one Corey Provis. What do you
Oh,
think?
I think there was a lot of, I don't know what the right word is, consternation that
Mm-hmm.
that Bremer was let go. It will be worse if it's not Provis.
I agree.
If it's Provis, people will just be like, okay, great. If it's not, oh boy. But here's my other like general wondering. The Twins are one of these teams kind of in limbo.
Yep.
So if this becomes more of a MLB takeover, will they, if they, let's say they have 6 teams or 8 teams or however many teams MLB then becomes the broadcaster of,
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily have to have 8 teams that broadcast. Like, does this become a rotational thing where you get like MLB national guys? Because that was the one thing that I really disliked more about the playoffs.
Yeah, agreed.
I wanted to hear Bremer and Morneau and Plouffe talk during the
Yep.
playoffs.
I agreed. Wouldn't like that. They actually have that. I know you're not a soccer guy, but they actually have that in MLS this year. So Apple has the rights for MLS, and they have kind of like a rotating crew of guys and girls that are calling games, and it just lacks the kind of like local, insightful, personal touch that I think you're kind of driving towards.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right. Like the Twins are in TV limbo, they're in revenue limbo a little bit. So I'm sure some of that is coloring some of this process and maybe some of the timing. So we'll be curious to see how that all shakes out. I should also point out we are recording right in the middle of Game 5 of the World Series. So I might get some live reactions to what's going on. Hopefully, Arizona can pull off a comeback win here. Here's my last question for you before we dig into the one topic of the week. Can you name? I bet you can. Can you name the number 1 and number 2 home run hitters in the Arizona Fall League as we record this podcast?
Yeah, I can. Aaron Sabato, who finally started to do something.
He's mashing.
And Kalai Rosario, who, when he's not swinging through balls, is hitting them over the fence.
That's right. That's right.
So that's super cool for the Twins.
That is
both
cool.
In the AFL home run derby that they're going to have here soon.
That's right. They're both competing, along with the next guy on the list, who's tied, I believe, with Rosario, is Kevin Alcantara.
Okay.
There's some really cool names in that AFL home run derby. Would like to get a look at some of the footage from that. I'm sure it will be very entertaining. All right. Are you ready to dig into the one and only topic of the week?
Yes, I am.
All right. So we kind of teased this last week. We touched on this a couple of weeks ago. And what we wanted to do is dedicate a whole episode to an end of season top 100 prospects list. A couple of weeks back, we touched on the fact that justbaseball.com released an end of season top 100 prospects, courtesy of and compiled by Aram Layton. He's a great follow, highly recommend. And here's why I wanted to spend some time digging into this list, just to kind of set the stage here, right? So number 1, they drop an updated top 100 at the end of that season, which is something that I appreciate. Most major outlets, MLB Pipeline, Baseball America, all of which we love, usually do some kind of update after draft guys have signed, but not necessarily right after they've made their professional debut. So some of these 2023 draftees, we get to see kind of where they fit in the list after a few months of professional baseball, which is super interesting.
So what, can I ask you a quick question? What's your theory as far as why these big ones wait versus why some smaller ones come out at this time? Because I have a theory.
I don't know that I have a good one. I don't know.
So just my gut says that, like, Baseball America, when they put their list together, they have so many people involved in that list, talking to so many people outside, right? So one of them is probably assigned the Twins, and they have to then collect all this new data, or, talk. Really, that list is generated based on what Twins people are telling them, or what rival teams are telling them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to get all that together. That I think it just, the information that they put into it is greater. So the information gathering is much longer.
Yeah.
When you have a smaller list, or, a less national list, one that's less popular than the 3 you mentioned, I think the information gathering is shorter, and the information seeking is really, more limited. That's just my theory.
Yeah.
But that's why you maybe see more variety on a list like this than the other list, because you're probably talking to some of the same people.
Yeah, I think that's a fair theory. I mean, I think another piece of it is probably driven by just like legacy practice, right? So like people want an updated top 100 after the draft because they want to see like where does Paul Skeens fit, where does Wyatt Langford fit, and it doesn't necessarily make sense if you do that to re-release an additional top 100 8 weeks later, 10 weeks later.
Right.
So it also might be as simple as that. But I think that's probably a solid theory. But I appreciate the switch up here. The other reason I want to dig in here is a good mix of like scouting notes and data that inform these rankings. And I think thinking about our particular proclivities, we tend to like ceiling. And I think these rankings are geared a little bit and weighted a little bit towards prospect ceiling. So we're going to dig into the top 100 guys for the Twins, Brewers, and Cubs. And we'll kind of go through guy by guy, right? And here's how we're going to kind of format this. We'll kind of name the guy and the ranking, position, age, all of that stuff. And then one of us is going to talk through how did they perform in 2023, any significant like data snippets, and then we'll just dig into some general discussion prospect by prospect. We'll probably cover some guys in more depth, some guys in less depth. So I'm excited to dig in. But let me ask you one question before you kind of kick us off here. Do you remember how many top 100 prospects from this list each org has?
I don't remember what I had for lunch today, Jamie. So I don't. I could read through these notes if you want me to
No,
read them.
no, I don't.
You have a combined number.
I have a combined number.
That's good I could do.
So it's 13. 13 combined Twins, Cubs, and Brewers. Cubs and Brewers each have 5. Twins have 3. And the thing I think is interesting is the lowest ranked of those 13 is 63rd overall. So ballpark, Twins, Cubs, and Brewers have 20% of the top 65 prospects on this list in those 3 systems. So I'm excited, man. Yeah, so we're gonna start. Yeah, we're gonna start at the bottom and work our way towards the top. So you're gonna do the Brewers, I'm gonna do the Cubs, and we'll kind of split up the Twins. So we'll start with number 63. That's a guy on your list, man. Take it away.
Yeah, Tyler Black, 63rd overall, 23-year-old third baseman who reached AAA this year. Just some stats on the season: batted 284 overall, 417 on base, 513 slugging for a 930 OPS, which in and of itself you'd say, well, that guy's pretty good, 3-4-5 type hitter. Yeah. However, I'm looking at these stats. I'm like 18 dingers, 12 triples, which suggests speed. Mm-hmm. And then I see 55 stolen bases at AAA. He had 19 combined stolen bases in 3 years of college. So this is something new, and I think that's something that we've seen. But when you can steal bases at that clip and get on base at that clip and also hit for power, you could really fit at any part of a lineup, which would be really cool in the old National League, a little less cool in the new National League. But he walked nearly twice as much as he struck out in college. Struck out just 15.5% of the time. I'm a fan of guys that don't strike out much, right? Mm-hmm. Ball play. And then missed a lot of last year. I think it was a scapula. Did I see that somewhere? Scapula. And so he comes back and he walks a ton, 88 walks in 123 games, only 100 strikeouts in 123 games. So chase rate of just 18% with a 90th percentile exit velocity. Dude. So sounds like a dude. And it's amazing because when we talk about Brewers prospects, I feel like they're almost all third basemen. Black, I think, played a little more second base prior to this year. Played 30 games at second base last year. Mm-hmm. Played a lot of outfield in the AFL coming into this year, and then played way more third base than anything this year with some first base. So left-handed bat, power, speed. Like, tell me what besides apparently not having a defensive home, tell me what's not to like about him.
Yeah, that's so. First of all, I have to like rip on us a little bit because I like we've really there's two guys that we're going to talk about today that we just haven't spoken about on this podcast yet, and we're on episode 11. It's Tyler Black and Owen Caissie of the Cubs, and they're both absolute duos that put up huge numbers, and deserve a lot more attention than we've given them so far. So that's another of the reasons for digging into this list. I think this is a really interesting thing about Black, like incredible production. And here's where I start to question prospect rankings, period. Not this list per se, but here's what I'm thinking about with this, right? If you stacked up his production in AAA against any high ceiling guy in the lower minors you would care to take, and you got a choice. You can pick like Max Clark, or you can pick Tyler Black with where he's at and the numbers he's put up at AAA. What are you picking and why? And the reason I asked that question is I think there's this kind of certain class of prospect that doesn't quite necessarily get the shine they deserve on lists as they get into the upper minors, even though they're super productive. And Tyler Black, to me, definitely falls in that category. Like, this dude is going to be playing Major League Baseball next year, and he's going to rake. And a lot of people are going to be like, where did he come from? But he's been doing it at AAA all of 2023.
Right. And I think that's really not uncommon for what we've seen around baseball. And I used to pay way more attention to, I couldn't wait till Baseball America's big, thick prospect book came out.
Yeah.
And I would guess of those 900 names, I probably was familiar with 750 of them. So when guys made it to the major leagues, it was like, oh yeah, I've heard of this guy. But nowadays, when I don't have time for that, I don't do that. There's always guys that come up and start to hit, and I'm like, wait a second, where'd this guy come from?
Mm-hmm.
And it's guys like this that just kind of made it through the system, and then all of a sudden they're professional, they're major league baseball players, like Eddie Julian for the
Yeah. Yep.
I would say, the vast majority of baseball fans weren't familiar with him. Then they watched the WBC and they're like, where's this guy?
Yep.
And so I think, like when we talked with Carlos Collazo on episode 2, he was like, well, you take the guy that's closer to the big leagues because there's less margin for not making it. And you mentioned Black's AAA numbers this year. So he played 39 games, batted 310, 428 on base, 942 OPS. Like he was
ready. It's ready.
22 years old. And so he will definitely be a Brewer, like just by need, like when do they need him? He'll be ready. And that's what's super cool for the team like the Brewers, because they're good.
Yep.
And they have a ton of prospects that are both close to ready, and then like that next wave. And then they have this other new exciting group coming up even later. So we've done a disservice by not talking about him, but I think he's given us plenty of opportunities to talk about him in the future.
For sure, 100% agree. And let me say one more thing on Tyler Black that I think applies to the Brewers group in general. Also, the producer Theo tells us Rangers have the bases loaded, top of the 8th. I feel like the strength of the Brewers prospect class at AA and AAA is going to influence and impact what they do this offseason, because they have hella reinforcements coming. And the Brewers don't necessarily spend a ton, and they're not necessarily big players in free agency, but they have some extremely high quality, exciting reinforcements on the way. And while that might not be a message Brewers fans want to hear, right, of like, oh, well, like, they're not going to do a ton in free agency to address like a decent amount of needs on the team. This group that we're working through today, man, they're really exciting.
And they're going to have a new manager.
Yeah, they are. And let's hope.
You tell me what you're hoping.
I'm hoping their old manager is not the new manager of the Cleveland Guardians.
Oh, yeah, I'd agree with that. But I hope that they find a manager that fits the mold of like, we're going to take young guys and teach them how to do it the right way, and we're going to stick with this guy for a long time instead of bringing in some old, crusty.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's Counsell, and I said this before, he's underappreciated in Milwaukee.
Yep.
And as soon as I mean, I said it before, he's going to end up with Stearns, and now he's getting interviews with Cleveland, but now also Houston's interested. Like, he's going to have his pick of whatever job he wants, and the Brewers aren't going to be the pick. I don't think that anyway.
We will see. Okay, we got to move on because I feel like we spent like 15 minutes talking about Tyler Black, and we got like 12 other guys to get through. So we'll spend a little less time on the next guy because we have talked about him quite a bit. And he's also a Brewer. So who's the next guy? Who's next on the list, man?
I was laughing at Theo's comment because we might have made him burn his banana bread. But number 2, Luis Lara, 18-year-old at high A. I actually picked him out for something that we did earlier as kind of a catalyst type in the future. But in 2023, split between low A and high A. Batted 286 overall, 373 on base, 359 slugging. So he's not a big power guy. If his 98 hits, 13 doubles, 3 triples, 2 home runs. So mostly a singles guy, 30 stolen bases and 40 attempts. So not a great rate. He's a small dude, 5'7", 155. I mean, that's not much bigger than Altuve, right?
Yep.
That's crazy because he's tiny. And so he's 18 and played 17 games at high A, which is probably where he starts next year, which would be like college freshman, right? Or high school senior making his debut at a level higher than we would necessarily think. So switch hitter, and is, the bat is there, but the power is not necessarily there. But at some point you'd think that might develop. 155, like you're not that much heavier in the bat. You know what I mean? Patience. He's a patient hitter, has good bat to ball skills, struck out 61 times in almost 400 plate appearances, walked 44 times. Is this a theme with the Brewers? Let's get guys that can get on base. Let's get guys that can move base to base, steal some bases. So this would be more of a 1 or 2 or 8 or 9 hitter, kind of extend the lineup, turn it over, and an outfielder. So you'd think at that size, probably not an overly powerful arm, ends up as a center fielder or left fielder. If you're a left fielder, you got to hit for some power. So that's kind of where he sits, but still at 18 years old, and you're AA, AAA, 3 promotions away. There's still time for him, and I think that'll be what's interesting. That the ceiling's high, but the floor, again, when you're dealing with someone that's that far away, floor can be lower.
Yep. I like about Lara that the profile is different, right? Like a lot of the hitters we're going to talk about have like a good amount of pop, a good amount of power. He has exceptional bat to ball skills, 90% zone contact rate. That's outstanding. And there's just something different. Also, you made mention of this already when we're talking about Black, but the Brewers kind of class is kind of seemingly divided, right, between this like AA, AAA group, and then there's this 2023 draft class we were both very excited and constantly gushing about in August. But Lara is in this kind of like middle range where he's kind of in between the two. So I like that he's a different profile from some of the other hitters they have. Really interesting to follow him.
He's going to fit in really with those high school guys. I mean, they're the same age.
Yep.
And the Wilkins and the college guys that were drafted this year are going to be more above that. So you're going to run those groups into each other just because there's not as many classes, that you're going from short season rookie ball and moving all the way up. But they're going to have dudes and dudes and dudes, which we've seen teams take advantage of by simply turning those dudes into other dudes.
Yep.
And they're going to have that option.
So many dudes. All right, that's Lara. Let's move on down the list, or up the list, I guess. And let's talk about number 51. First Cubs prospect on the board. I know we're both big fans. This is Matt Shaw, 21-year-old infielder. We'll call him a second baseman. Drafted out of the University of Maryland. I know we both felt this way, but when the Cubs made this pick, I was like, oh man, nailed it. I think we talked about it at the time. if the Twins had cut a deal at 5 in order to overspend on later picks, that Matt Shaw was a prospect that we would have been most comfortable doing that with. He's such a great athlete, man. Makes a lot of contact. He hits the ball hard. He's a solid infielder, a good base runner, steals a decent amount without being super, super fast. Exit velos in college were like 113. That's going to be a little lower with a wooden bat, obviously. But let's talk about his debut numbers, man. Ridiculous.
Yeah, throw him out.
Started in the complex league, and they gave him 3 games, and they were like, nah, you're done here, son. 277 WRC plus in 3 games. He just mashed. That was too easy. And he went to high A, where he played 20 games and only put up a 197 WRC plus, hitting 393, 427, slugging 655, 4 home runs in 20 games, 7 stolen bases. I mean, just ridiculous. And let's not forget that, like, we sometimes equate like high A to like the SEC roughly, right, as a correlation. Matt Shaw played in the Big Ten, not the strongest college baseball conference. So then he went to Double A for the end of the season, and folks were like, well, maybe he'll slow down a little bit. He did slow down a little bit, but still put up really gaudy numbers. 15 games, 70 plate appearances. At Double A, 292, 329, slugging 523, 120 WRC plus, 3 more home runs, 6 more stolen bases. I mean, as an offensive weapon, he is going to be great. There's not much to complain about. At Double A, he was striking out 17% of the time. That's just fine. Would like to see a little bit of work on the approach. Across high A and Double A, he was only walking like 4.4% of the time, so almost never. If that could get up to like, the 8, 9, 10% range, then you'd really be that'd be like the cherry on top. But Matt Shaw, I know, was one of our kind of favorite prospects going into the 23 draft and felt like a good fit with the Cubs. Could you have possibly imagined that he would be so incredible on his debut, though?
I mean, no, but at the same time, this was a draft class that we knew was going to be really, really good.
True.
And in a typical draft class, I don't think he drops as far as he does, right?
Yeah.
He could go number 5 and do that, and you'd be like, oh, well, that's what you expect. He was a top 5 pick. And so I don't think it's fair to say, as expected, but I also don't think it's fair to say, he really outperformed expectations because he's a really good baseball player.
Yep. Really, really good. Should debut in 2024. Agree?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, can't ask for much more than that. All right, that's Matt Shaw, number 51. Real excited about him. We'll move on to number 50. We are back with the Brew Crew. Who are we going to talk about at 50?
Number 50, 21-year-old right-handed pitcher Jacob Misiorowski.
Yeah.
Who, a JC guy, which you love JC guys.
I do.
And then has come by and played 2022 in low A, and then 2023 went from low A to high A to Double A. 71 combined innings, 110 strikeouts, which is almost 14 per 9. The complaint would be he did walk 42. So you have the hopes that he's a frontline starting pitcher with the fallback of being a fireman closer relief pitcher. And so a fastball that grades pretty highly on the 2080 scale, hits triple digits, works in the mid 90s. I think if you see him as a starter, it's going to be that mid 90s. If you see him as a closer, it's going to be Duran type numbers.
Yeah.
Right. And then, depending on where you read, is his breaking ball a curveball or is it a slider? Either way, it's hard to hit. And he's developing a changeup that is newish, right? And so after talking to Jonas last week, it's like, is there going to be a time where they're just like, you're going to be a starter, you're going to throw the changeup,
Mm.
And as a result, we see numbers dip, and then people sour on him, and then it's like,
Oh,
oh,
interesting.
now it's a usable third pitch. Like there's a lot of variables that go into it. But I think the reality is, if you have a dude that's throws as hard as he does, that has two really good pitches right now, if he can throw it over the plate some of the time, he's going to be a problem. And so 50 seems fair. Um, Holds his opponents to an OPS under 400. I feel like that's good.
insane.
And then 22% swinging strike rate and 45% in zone whiff rate. But that might be because guys go up there and they're like, well, it's not going to be a strike. Oh, swung and miss. The ceiling is very, very high. But I think in this case, with a young guy, the floor is also pretty high too, and that's why you see him where he is. We could be talking 6 months from now, maybe not, 6, 7, 8 months from now, and he could be at 25 or 20 if he comes out and just dominates. So another guy that I think, could he debut next year? I don't see why not.
100%, especially if he's a reliever. That's a given, I think.
And they've done that. They did it with Burns, right?
Yep, 100%. Yeah, man. He's so enjoyable to watch, man. I remember, like, my first time getting like a really good look at him was in the Futures game this year, and he was working in a relief role, obviously, right? Because it's like 1 or 2 innings at a time. But he just came out and threw 101, 102 mile per hour fastballs past everyone, and just it was like the best hitting prospects in the game, and just no one was anywhere near his stuff. And like, I think that's a good point that you raised, right? Like, we use the term relief or risk all the time, but how much of a risk is that if he's a Yohan Duran-esque, completely dominant back end of the bullpen piece that you have under team control for like 6 years? Like, I know obviously they would want him to stick as a starter, but the Brewers have shown an incredible aptitude for developing pitching. And so if Misiorowski does become a back-end reliever, I have no doubt that he'll be incredibly effective, and he will be an absolute weapon for that, man. I can't wait to watch him next season.
And don't you think, and maybe this is getting way off topic, and it is, but sometimes I do that. You talk about reliever risk and having the value. If you can have a guy like this that you have in your pocket for games that you're winning to get an inning or 5 outs, that's more valuable than having a number 4 starter. And like, I would love if Duran was a starting pitcher and they'd pitch him every 5 days and he was nasty all the time. But the reality is, you need 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 guys that can win games for you, or not lose games, and they have to be really, really good. And he would be one of those guys. And there's huge value in that if you're a good team, and there's 100%. Less value in that if you're not a good team.
I mean, look no further than Game 4 of the World Series, where the Diamondbacks are throwing a bullpen game and they don't have anyone who can get through a couple of solid innings until the middle of the game when it's already too late. And I get that they made a fight back, but for sure, like, pitching has evolved in such a more nuanced way than starter reliever. And I think when we're talking about prospects, it's useful to push ourselves not to just talk about starting pitcher, relief pitcher. And Theo is on a rant in the chat about no more bullpen games in the World Series. Let's not talk about pitchers as starting pitchers or relief pitchers.
It's good. And you said base pitching has evolved. No, pitching's evolving. We ain't done. We are not done. And it's going to get to the point where the old baseball fans absolutely hate it, because the bullpen game thing is going to become even more common, because you're going to be like, okay, this guy's going to go through the order one time. This guy's going to want me to get through the order one time. This guy's going to go through the order one time. And if you do that really well, you use 3 or 4 pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to your next group and you can throw 3 innings and then throw 3 innings 3 days later. And it's going to work out to the point where it's way different, but teams have a better setup to win games. And you're going to have the Cole Sands types employed to pitch in games that you're losing. And that's going to be okay. And that's just going to be the accepted way that this works. And Theo's going to have to accept it.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on. We're breaking the top 50, number 46. He's a Cubs guy. He was my Cubs pick for the AFL. That is Kevin Alcantara, currently second in the AFL in home runs, tied with Kalai Rosario. I think 5 overall. He is a 21-year-old center fielder at Double-A for the Cubs. Not going to be a center fielder when he gets to the big leagues because PCA is going to be that guy. But let's just talk about some consistency as he is moving through levels. All right. 2022 at A ball, WRC plus 124. 2023 at A plus, WRC plus 124. 2023, when he moves up to AA, WRC plus is 130. This dude can flat out hit. He is an insane athlete. He's like 6'6", just like an absolute unit. Like if you like video game designed a baseball player, he might look like this. Spent most of 2023 at high A. Spent a good amount of time playing against the Twins, players in the Twins org actually. But up to 86.3, 41.4, 66 slug with 12 home runs, 15 steals, walks about 8% of the time, struck out 23. So there's some refinement in the approach there. The Rangers got 2 more in the top of the 9th. Looks like the World Series is about to be over, so good thing that we're recording. Alcantara ground ball rate up a little bit this season. Exit velocity is insane, like 113. We're talking in the mid teens, plus 100. Like he really hits the ball hard. Is he going to be able to stay short enough to the ball? Is the contact going to be enough? Are my questions with him? But he said a good AFL.
So is it fair to say that the Cubs will try to avoid making the same mistake that they made with Eloy Jimenez and trading him? Because that's the name that the comp, and I know you hate comps. You're not a comp guy, so I'm looking for them to make just to spite you sometimes. But that's the vibe I get here. Fair?
Fair in terms of like power, I think. Not fair in terms of athleticism. Like I feel like Eloy Jimenez was never that incredible of an athlete, but I could just be not remembering when he first came up. Like watching some footage of Kevin Alcantara hitting bombs in the AFL, and you hear the sound the ball makes when it hits his bat. It's that like kind of shotgun reverb sound. It just sounds kind of different. So I think that's a decent comp. But I just like the White Sox is such a sloppy organization, and so are all their players. So I think it's
Jimenez as a prospect was a dude.
Yeah. See, it's too. Yeah. I'm probably not remembering. Like I'm probably not giving him the credit he got back then because it's a while ago now. That's why.
As a 22-year-old, Jimenez debuts and has an 828 OPS, a 116 OPS plus in 122 games as a rookie. And then age 23, 24, and 25 season, he plays less than 200 games.
Yeah.
Like I just think the ceiling that they had as prospects probably pretty similar, where you're talking, big time players.
Fair enough. And I think the Cubs should be excited if that was the outcome for Alcantara. So that's 46. Now we're jumping into the top 30. Your favorite guy. Do you want to talk about him or no? Number 30 is Emmanuel Rodriguez, 20-year-old outfielder.
I think we should talk about him because it makes sense to talk about. He's polarizing, I think, because he does so many things that you look for in a prospect, and then he does so many things that you want to avoid in a prospect. You can't deny some of the things that he's done that I'll let you talk about, but you also can't deny the fact that he strikes out way too much.
Yep.
And that's problematic.
Yep. So here's the thing that I'm really grateful that we got a little insight from Jonas last week on, right? Which was something that I'd seen written a little bit, and I think Twins fans have seen with Eddie Julian a ton. And you specifically asked this question. which is a lot of Erod's strikeouts last season were due to like passivity. Like he took a lot of called strike threes, which is obviously not a great thing, but it's a better and a more correctable fix, I think, than swinging and missing through strike three, right? So I think that's something that's encouraging. Um, the other things that we talked about a little bit last week are touched on, even though we're mostly talking about pitching. Chase rate is insane, 15%. That's really, really good. Max exit velocity of 117. That's like Matt Wallner on the way to Aaron Judge type territory for max exit velocity. I mean, that's like 90th, 95th percentile in MLB. So I think you're right. He's polarizing. It's fair. The strikeouts have to come down if he's going to kind of max out his potential. There's also a ton of conjecture and content at the moment at Twins Daily and other places that he is the most likely of the Twins crop to be traded this offseason for pitching. What say you about an Erod trade for a like playoff caliber starting pitcher?
Well, I think that's a fair thought to have, but I also think you could say that about most of these other hitters that we've talked about tonight.
Sure.
Right? Because they're all, maybe not all of them, but they're three good baseball teams right now at the major league level. I mean, the two of them made the playoffs. One was in the mix until the very end. A lot of the players are coming back or are younger. Like you look at the Brewers outfielders, like they have young outfielders already up, and we're talking about other guys that could potentially play in the outfield for them. The Cubs have spent money on a shortstop, and then they have Matt Shaw. And so you could really talk about any of these players that we've talked about so far or we'll talk about yet, and they could all be trade tickets or trade tips. And what are you looking for almost all the time if you're a competing team? You're looking for a playoff type starting pitcher. The Twins pulled it off miraculously last year.
Yeah.
Right? They traded Luis Arraez, who won a batting title, and they got Pablo Lopez, who was exceptional.
So good.
The Brewers have done this before in the past. They traded for Greinke. They traded for Sabathia. Like they used their chips, they pushed him in, and they went for it. So yeah, I think we could say that about Rodriguez. He's the most likely Twin to be traded because he's got that value and he's kind of blocked by other guys. But the same thing holds true for these other products. These are the guys you're going to ask about if you want to make a trade, and the Brewers are calling. You're asking about these guys, right? And that's just how baseball works. And these are also the prospects that teams want to hold on to because they're going to be the answer for these next teams. And if you screw up and you get rid of one of these guys, we hear about it whenever they do well in the playoffs.
Yeah. Right? I just think, yeah.
Every time he hits a home run, it's like, ooh, the Cardinals gave him away.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah, 100%. I just think it's potentially a highest stakes decision for the Twins when you've got three guys and they're all top 50 and not really anything going on at the bottom end of the top 100 on this list or any other, as opposed to the Cubs and the Brewers who have 5, and like you could easily name me 6 more Brewers prospects that could easily soon be slotting into like the back end of the top 100 list, you know?
Right. But what's the Twins window?
Now.
What's the Brewers and Cubs windows? Not necessarily right now.
Sure.
And so that's why it would be we're going to have to take one of these guys. It's the Wilson Ramos thing all over again, right? Their window was right now, and they were cashing in on a guy that came up and hit extremely well, traded him for a closer, and everyone was like, Matt Capps. But at the time, it was like, we're going to win. And that was their goal. And they played exceptionally well that season. And then the crapshoot of the playoffs happens.
Yeah.
And it didn't work as well. But I think that's kind of the difference. The window for the Twins seems to be now, as opposed to the window for these other teams doesn't feel like it's right now. And I could be wrong about the Brewers with Woodruff. Who knows? Burns, probably angry. Like maybe that window closed already. I'm not willing to say that, but Counsell, maybe on the way out.
Yeah, it's a lot of balls in play at the moment for them, for sure.
And so I think that's one of the main differences when you're talking about those types of trades.
Dude, are we doing like an emergency get on the podcast episode if any of these guys has traded this offseason? Because I kind of feel like we gotta.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
All right, let's move on. We're in the top 30 now. 29, another Cubs guy. Okay, so this is the second guy I talked about at the top of the show who we have ignored, and it's not cool. Owen Caissie, 21-year-old outfielder who spent the season at Double-A. Just gonna walk you through his numbers for the season. So he spent the whole season there, right? 100. He's been kind of spend an entire season at one level type of a guy. 120 games at Double-A this season. Bats left, throws right, and he really had a breakthrough, man. 22 home runs. His previous high was 11. Sorry, my page is glitching here real quick. Walked 14% of the time, really high K rate, struck out 31% of the time, but put together 289, 398, 519 slug at Double-A with a 918 OPS. His ISO was 230. That's ridiculous. WRC plus of 144 in a full season at Double-A. A little bit more consistency with his swing, driving the ball. Home run to fly ball rate went from 12% to 30%. So something clearly clicked in his swing in 2023, and he kind of made the power breakthrough that I think the Cubs were hoping for and Cubs fans were hoping for. And he is another guy, kind of like Black, but not quite as far along, I'd say, who is knocking on the door and is potentially going to make a debut in 2024. Why have we ignored Owen Caissie, man? I feel kind of bad. That's like 2 bad misses for us.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is when you have guys that get traded like before they play, it's you never really know how to treat them. And so the Cubs move on from Darvish and Rizzo, and they get guys back that just so happen to turn into Alcantara and Owen Caissie. And so then they're in these big markets, and no offense to big markets, but those prospects are always inflated, right? If any good prospect is doing for the Yankees what they're doing for another team, they're the greatest thing ever. And so I think the Cubs might also kind of be in there too, right? But I think that's what happened with him is he was drafted, highest drafted Canadian outfielder ever by the Padres. And the Padres are just dealing young guys, right? That's
Ooh,
just
we should talk about the Padres next week. They're in a mess.
They're a problem. Yeah, they went for it, they missed, and now it's like, we got a problem.
Can't pay our guys.
That's what happened here. He gets brought into a new system. He's not great. I mean, he was pretty good in 2021, and then was okay in 2022, and then just blew up again in 2023.
Yeah.
And so that's why we missed on him. Power guy, but I think the types of guys that are most likely to be traded are the guys that already been traded once.
Yep.
The Cubs bring him in. He's not a super high profile guy. All of a sudden his trajectory goes up, the value goes up, and you're more likely to cash in on that than if you developed him yourself. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And I could certainly be wrong, but I think that's something.
Also less of a well-rounded tool set than I think some of the other guys that they have. So yeah, I would agree with that. Let's move on to number 28. I do actually want to touch on this guy because I don't think we've talked about him extensively. 28 is Brooks Lee, 22-year-old infielder at Triple-A for the Twins. I'm curious for a take on him, Jeremy. Max exit velo 109, doesn't hit the ball quite as hard as some of the other guys, but a legit switch hitter. Like good from both sides of the plate, better from the left. Zone contact rate around 90%, and overall contact rate is around 80. I mean, that's like really, really good bat to ball skills, man. Spent 2023 at Double-A and Triple-A in both places. he kind of had a slow start, and then when he got warmed up, he looked really, really good. Just his double A numbers here, played 400 plate appearances, walked about 10% of the time, only struck out about 15% of the time. 292, 365, 476 line, 120 WRC plus at double A. So here's my question for you about Brooks Lee. Texas Rangers just won the World Series. Congrats. Here's my question for you about Brooks Lee. I feel like we've now gotten to a place where the narrative around Brooks Lee is he doesn't have that high of a ceiling. He can be a like 2 to 3 win guy, which like that's not nothing, by the way. But I feel like we might be in a place where we're actually starting to like undervalue Brooks Lee as a prospect a little bit because he's seen as this like higher floor, lower ceiling guy when you compare him to guys like Erod or Walker Jenkins or any of the, Jackson Chourio, whoever. So I'm curious whether you feel that way, or maybe I'm just being a little oversensitive on Brooks Lee Twitter social media chat.
No, I don't think you are. I think him falling into the Twins' lap was awesome. But I mean, we wrote up a lot of guys. I don't think we wrote. I mean, maybe it was like we should probably write Brooks Lee up for the Twins.
Yeah.
Without ever thinking it was actually going to happen.
Yep.
Right.
Definitely.
But the shine of him wore off when the numbers weren't super gaudy. And then all of a sudden, this new shiny toy rolled in, named Walker Jenkins, while this other shiny toy named Royce Lewis went off. And so you see those things while you're also seeing Brooks Lee being above average. And it's like, give me the shiny toy.
Yep.
And I think he's going to be a really good player. He's going to be the type of guy that hits 300, but it doesn't seem like he hit 300 because he maybe didn't have the huge home run, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or didn't have the ringing double off the wall, but it's just going to be a really, really solid dude and play a lot of games and provide solid defense at third or short or second or first, I think. He's going to fit in well with the team. Is he ever going to be the face of the franchise? No. Right? I think that's just how it's going to be.
I have a comp for you.
Bring it.
Okay, so to be abundantly clear, this is a production comp, right? Okay. So this is the numbers might be similar comp. My comp for Brooks Lee is actually Jorge Polanco with slightly better bat-to-ball skills, right? So Jorge Polanco had that one season he was incredible where he made the All-Star team and put up 4.5 WAR. Most of the rest of his career, he's sitting in the 2 to 3.5 range. I think that's a fair, and 15 to 22 home runs, hitting to 80, something like that. I feel like that's a solid expectation for Brooks Lee, solid but not spectacular defense. That feels about right to me. And Jorge Polanco's been one of the best Twins in the last decade. So that's why, to me, I think we're maybe undervaluing him a little bit, but that'd be my production comp for Lee. What do you think?
Yeah, because I think when Jorge Polanco's in the lineup, he's not the guy in the lineup that you fear.
Mm-hmm.
But when he's not in, something's always missing. And then he's hurt, and you're like, man, the lineup was so much better when Polanco was in it. Then he comes back, and he's not great, but he just adds that missing piece. Good at bats, good on base skills. I think you're spot on with that, and I think that's what's going to fit in really well. Polanco will be back next year. I think that's almost a given. Lee will be at AAA. Maybe the avenue for Lee to get to the majors is winning if Polanco goes down, and Lee just kind of fills in. Polanco is not good at third. Lee will be better at third.
I agree.
Lee will be an option at first. Polanco is never going to be an option at first. So
for sure.
I think that there's some more upside with Lee. And also he dealt with injuries and played at not a super high collegiate level.
Mm-hmm.
That I think maybe there's still more in the tank, but still you get to AAA as quick as he did and play as bad as well as he did. There's something to be said about that. And that's why we're talking him. He's still top 30 prospect, and he's a number 1 team prospect in baseball.
Yep, I agree. He's also been injury free since he turned pro. So let's keep that energy going. All right, let's move on. 26 is a Brewer. Over to you.
So I pull up his BREF page, and the pronunciation is Jeferson. Okay, I say Jefferson, but it's Jeferson.
Good job,
which
Jeremy.
makes sense because it's Spanish. Jeferson Quero, acquired in trade, and in 2023 at Double-A, 262, 339, 441 triple slash for a 779 OPS, which isn't spectacular, but he's doing it in 90 games behind the dish. And so that's where the value is, right? As a catcher, hit 16 home runs, 5 stolen bases, so that's a little out of the ordinary for Brewer, but he is a catcher.
Mm-hmm.
And so just some other numbers. Cut down his chase rate from 45% to 30%, from his first 30 games to his next 30 games. Contact rate at 85% in the zone, and he's a swinger. He's a free swinger. 68 strikeouts in 90 games. For me, and I think I said this before, so I'll say it again because I'm pretty sure I'm on the record saying it. He just didn't really do it for me as a prospect.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see him at 26, I'm like, okay, I feel like that's a little rich, because I feel like we've gone through catchers like this, and the one that's on my mind escapes me. I feel like he went from the Cleveland organization to San Diego, and I can't think of his name, but same type of guy, right? A good hitter, but then kind of gets to the top level, and it's like, if you're not elite defensively, thank you, Theo, Francisco Mejia.
Always comes through, yeah.
If you're not getting it done at an elite level behind the plate and at an average level at the plate, you're almost you risk becoming unplayable as a catcher.
Yep.
And that's where the very fine line works for Jeferson Quero.
Nice pronunciation there, Jeremy. I think you hit on something really legit though. And this, I find this to be true both for the draft and in like talking through prospects also. Evaluating catchers is hard, man. Evaluating catchers' offense is one thing, because you're going to ding them less than you're going to ding other positions where the offensive expectations are greater. But evaluating catcher defense is really pretty much an impossible job. So I think it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I kind of agree with you. We'll see how he shows up in 2024. All right, I think we're down to like a last 4 here. 2 more Cubs coming up. Number 21, I know we're both a big fan of this guy too. Cade Horton, 22-year-old right-handed pitcher, made it all the way to Double-A in 2023. Fastball, nice fastball shape, plays well at the top of the zone, 95 to 97. He can crank it up to close to 100. A lot of swing and miss there. Good slider, kind of sweepy slider, a lot of horizontal break. And he has really good control and command of his pitches. Also offering a curveball. Cade Horton is a guy who was a surprise draft pick. We're going back to the Brooks Lee draft now, 2022, excuse me. And he was taken right ahead of where the Twins took Lee, and he was this absolute helium name who had just pitched incredibly for the University of Oklahoma down the stretch. And I think collectively there was a lot of surprise about that pick. And it has turned out beautifully for the Cubs so far. So he worked through 3 levels in 2023, made it through A, high A, and Double-A, and pretty much crushed all of them. So 47, I'm going to start with high A, pitched 47 innings there. He was striking out 12.5 guys per 9, walking just north of 2, 323 FIP. And then he got up to Double-A, 27 innings there, striking out over 10 guys per 9. He walked a few more, but it's a smaller sample. 1.33 ERA in Double-A in 27 innings pitched. 251 FIP. Cade Horton is absolutely. Is he the best right-handed starting pitching prospect in baseball?
Well, if he's not number one, he's top three, and I think that there's something to be said there. But how many guys have we seen like this that then don't do anything? Forrest Whitley, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was going to be the next big thing, and I don't think he's debuted in the majors. And I think Cade Horton has done it really well for a year and change. Came to Oklahoma as a two-way guy, played mostly third base, and had like you mentioned, a really good spring into the College World Series, and was projected as a late first-round guy.
That's wild.
And then him and Rocker both went off the board before the Twins. Twins thinking no pitchers would be off the board. So this has turned well for them, and I think Cade Horton, if he gets a chance, could be in the Rookie of the Year conversation. It's just going to be a matter of when that opportunity comes, because he's got the potential to be a top of the line starter, and I think that's huge for the Cubs.
For sure agree. Best right-handed pitching prospect in baseball. Names to consider: Paul Skeens has got to be one. Cade Horton. I'm also going to throw in there two more. Andrew Painter, I think, of the Phillies, who had Tommy John this season. I think he may have been the number one guy had he stayed injury-free. And then Jackson Jobe, Tigers right-handed prospect who was also pitching in the AFL, which jogs me to mention that in the near future, we're gonna dedicate an episode to each org and who are the prospects that might come back to bite them in the behind from other organizations in their division. And Jackson Jobe is definitely going to feature on that for the Detroit Tigers.
So out of those four, who do you take as the number one prospect?
I think I would take a healthy Andrew Painter, but he's not. So the obvious answer is Skeens. But I would go, given injuries right now, I'd probably go Skeens, then Horton, number two right-handed pitching prospect in baseball.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I would take Skeens for sure, and I'm a big Cade Horton fan.
Yep, fair enough. 18, we got 3 to go. I think we're not going to spend a ton of time on 18 because I'm sour at the Cubs for how they handled him. 18 is PCA, 21-year-old center fielder at AAA. Cubs called him up on the back end of this season, and they just had him sit there and do nothing on the bench. Let's take a quick look at his AAA numbers from this season. He had, or let's start with AA. 342 plate appearances at AA in 2023. Walking around 10% of the time, striking out around 25%. That's really consistent. He hit 289, 371, 527, 136 WRC plus. He did take a dip at AAA, excuse me. That's fair to say. 106 WRC plus in 34 games, 158 plate appearances. The power was still there, but he had a really slow start at AAA before turning it around and then getting called up to warm the bench for the last month of the season while the Cubs completely capitulated and fell apart. Contact rate is going to be the thing with him, I think, to monitor in 2024. Again, my year's confused. And can he keep the strikeout rate under control? I think, we've talked about him a lot. The floor is always going to be pretty high because he's such an incredible athlete. The defense is 80 grade. The speed is there or thereabouts. He's going to steal a ton of bases. So even if he's struggling at the plate, he's going to provide a ton of value on defense and on the base paths. Anything to add on PCA?
No, he's a great defender. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. 2 more guys. Number 10, man, 10. The last Twins prospect on the list is one Walker Jenkins, 18-year-old outfielder at A-ball for the Twins. He debuted after signing 5th overall. Spent some time in rookie ball and just crushed that. 59 plate appearances, then went up to Fort Myers, had about an equal amount of playing time there. Walked 7% of the time, struck out only 10% of the time. At Fort Myers, he hit 392, 446, slugged 608 for a 182 WRC plus. At the end of Fort Myers season, we asked and kind of advocated for him to go to Cedar Rapids to help with their playoff push.
Didn't need him.
They won the Midwest League anyway. Is 10 too rich for Walker Jenkins?
No. He was really, really good. And I'm guessing he's still behind Skeens, Langford, and Cruz on this list.
Yep.
And I think that we've talked about ceiling. Yeah, he's as he should be ahead of Clark. But I think he did everything you wanted him to do, and the ceiling is incredibly high. You talked about how this is going to err on the side of ceiling, right? And so he's going to start the season in Cedar Rapids, I would hope, and play his way out of there. And who knows what happens. As long as he hits, he's going to hit for power. He's going to take good at bats. He can be serviceable in the outfield. What more do you want from a guy?
Yep. The thing I liked the most about Walker Jenkins' debut at both levels was the amount of maturity and offensive approach. He did not hit for a ton of power. He had a lot of doubles and a few triples, not a ton of home runs. And to me, watching as many at-bats as I could and looking at his numbers, he did what he had to do. He didn't walk a ton at either level. He didn't need to, because he could put the bat on the ball and put it in play and put it where fielders weren't. So impressed with his debut stint at both levels. Twins fans have to be absolutely psyched about him for 2024, right? That is such a gift, jumping up to number 5 in the lottery. They'll draft around 24, I think, this year. But what a pickup that's going to be for the Twins.
It's huge. It's awesome.
Last but not least, a Brewer is going to round us out. Jeremy, who is it and where are they?
So number 3 overall, 19-year-old Jackson Chourio, who finished the season at AAA, outfielder, spent almost all of 2023 at AA after finishing 2022 at AA. So he played 6 games at AA in 2022, batted .087, moved up, played 122 games at AA, batted .280, 336, 467 for an 803 OPS at 19 years old. So that was 4.5 years younger than the average player in that league. Hit 22 home runs, walked 41 times, struck out 103 times. So neither is great, but neither is horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Stole 43 bases, which why wouldn't you if you're a Brewer? 23 doubles, three triples. Max exit velocity 112. So I feel like there's maybe some more there.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's not even fully grown.
I know, he's 19. He's playing in winter ball right now. 4 games, 15 at bats, 3 hits, and he's almost 9 years younger than the average winter ball player in Venezuela, which is crazy because he played as a 17-year-old and hit 204, played as an 18-year-old, hit 256. So he's going and playing high quality baseball year round. And he's going to play. So then he finished the season with 6 games at AAA. So he's going to start the year at AAA. Batted 333 in those 6 games. Not a huge sample size, but he's going to start the year in Nashville, and then whenever Milwaukee needs him, he's going to be the guy. And if he broke camp with them and had the opportunity to go Julio Rodriguez and get them an extra draft pick, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me at all. If he shows up, if he has a really good winter and then shows up in spring training and just keeps hitting, like why wouldn't you just have him break camp?
For sure. For sure. And that's, I mean, we talked about that earlier, right? This crop of higher minors, Brewers guys could potentially impact how they think about their roster construction for next year. I think like Misiorowski should be in the mix, not to break camp with the Brewers, but to debut in 2023 for sure. You got to think Tyler Black should be in the mix as well. 2024. I can't get my years right today, man. It is a struggle. But yeah, I agree, man. I mean, look, Chourio's going to be a superstar, right? Like, that's his trajectory. It's like him and Caminero, and like that's the superstar group in this current top 100 list, you would think. And Jackson Holiday, obviously, as
So Holiday was one. Who was number 2 on this list?
Caminero, Tampa Bay third baseman who just debuted right at the end of the season. And then he had Chourio at 3, Wyatt Langford at 4, and Evan Carter, who is been absolutely tearing up the postseason at 5. And I'm curious now if Evan Carter is going to go into 2024 with rookie status, because if he is, he has to be the runaway favorite for AL Rookie of the Year, given his postseason performance.
And then he's going to lose it to his teammate.
Langford?
Well, I mean, Wyatt Langford's going to be better. How about when Garcia went down and the question was asked if Langford was considered?
They like scoffed at it. That's not an unreasonable question. I think it's a great question. Yeah, Chourio, superstar. Can't wait. So I think we're pretty spoiled, man. Like having gone through this list. Man, how fired up are you to watch all these guys next season?
It'll be fun.
It's gonna be super fun.
And that's without talking about what's really also cool, the Brewers draft class of 2023, which we didn't touch on.
I know I didn't even talk about them. But
and the Twins 22 pitchers, which we didn't talk about them either.
We didn't. We sure didn't. But that is a nice segue to just previewing some things that we have coming up, because we are, it looks like, well, not it looks like, we're in the off season now. Crazy. Free agency is going to start soon. Just want to preview some things that are coming down the pipe real quick before we call it a day. We are going to be getting some guests on to do like really in-depth breakdowns of each org's farm system. So we're going to do one episode per org. We're going to continue to work to get great guests on throughout the off season. We will be breaking down all of the significant off season things, right? So draft, lottery, walking people through how that works. International free agent signings in January, probably going to have a guest on to talk through that. And then as the calendar turns to 2024, we will start to get into 2024 draft content, which I cannot wait for. College baseball, high school baseball, all the amateur stuff too. Should be super fun. Thank you guys for continuing to support the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you, producer Theo, for keeping things moving behind the scenes. I can't believe that you can do all of this and bake banana bread at the same time. Truly impressive. If you want to support the show, download our episodes, retweet us, give us positive reviews on Spotify or anywhere, Apple, anywhere you get your podcast. All of it helps. And we've seen a really great, steady increase in stream of support over the past few weeks, especially. So really appreciate you guys. We'll be back next week for episode 12. Until then, enjoy the beginning of the off season.